Welcome, everyone. I'm Brian O'Leary, Executive Director of the Book Industry Study Group, and thanks for coming to today's Coffee Break webinar, How Do We Talk About Rights? We're fortunate today actually to have Tricia McCraney, who's Projects Consultant at Virtusales Publisher Solutions as our presenter. Tricia, in addition to a significant career working with a variety of different companies in the book publishing space, is also former chair of BISG's Rights Committee. Tricia, welcome today. Thank you for preparing today's talk, and I look forward to hearing from you. We'll leave a few minutes at the end for questions, so if you have them, feel free to add them to the Q&A box.
Great, thank you, Brian. Thanks for inviting me. So today I'm excited to talk to you about how we talk about rights. And really, I just want to say one quick thing about BISG's Rights Committee before we jump into the drama around the question of rights. I just wanted to say a little bit about where we talk about rights collectively. So if you are not a member of BISG's Rights Committee, please know that that is the place where publishers, distributors, and vendors come together to discuss rights. And the committee really works to identify the most important rights-related issues facing the industry. And that's done with a focus on where information, standards, and best practices can benefit and advance the book business. But today, as many of you already know, we're going to talk about a rights vocabulary, and the Rights Committee itself has already made several attempts to develop a rights vocabulary or a standard, set of terms that we use when we're talking about rights. The primary considerations around these attempts and the efforts that we are still making today are really that managing rights and growing your rights business or increasing the number of rights transactions that are happening and scaling them really requires more automated options and solutions and capability than is currently being used by most publishers. And looking forward to what will happen in the future when we think about blockchain and smart contracts, we recognize that the standard terms and definitions that we agree on when talking about rights are essential to helping that happen, and frankly are sorely needed. I'll come back to this idea a little bit closer to the end of our coffee break, but let's start with the question of what are rights. I'm going to peel it right back, and thinking about this question, this is a conversation that Chris Kleeman and I have had many times, and many of you know Chris. She's the current chair of BISG's Rights Committee, and some of you know her from her previous career at Wiley, and she's with us today. But when we really boiled it down, in the discussions that we had, what we came up with is really that rights are IP. So of course, that's the intellectual property that you've acquired rights to or can license or created or can license, plus any exclusivities, specific grants or iterations of formats of that IP, as well as any explicit language and territory options, plus of course, any restrictions. So the formats or languages or territories that you can't license, as well as any limitations on content or duration or time frame. All of that to say, that's the little rights formula that I came up with in terms of what are rights. So IP, which is of course intangible, plus exclusivities, plus restrictions. But to this end, I want to talk about confusing rights terms. So where do we get tangled up when we're talking about rights and when we're talking about what happens in the rights business? The first kind of concept that I want to talk about that's foundational before I talk about some specific terms is that it's important to highlight one of the things that we commonly trip over when we're talking about rights, and that's rights in versus rights out. Rights in, of course, are the rights you're acquiring. And these, for some reason, they often get mixed up when you're reading about rights or when we're talking about rights. This is a really essential thing to clarify. Are we talking about rights in or rights out? Rights in are the rights that you as a publisher are acquiring. So that might be full volume or book rights. It might be content items like chapters or other pieces of content, or even characters and brands. And these are generally defined by a contract agreement, right? So you have a contract that defines what you're acquiring from a creator or someone else. And it talks about formats, territories, acquired subrights, and then royalty rules and formulas. Rights in also includes the acquisition of any permission to reuse third-party content in your own publications. So that could be when you're acquiring the rights to publish text. So it could be a whole chapter, it could be a poem, or it could be something like images or illustrations and other content, whether within the book or on a cover. Can also, or maybe on marketing material. Rights out, that's really about solicitation, negotiation, and granting or licensing permission to content that you've acquired. So essentially this is, subrights, which is a term that, is kind of going away in favor of global licensing. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. But all of that, discussion of what are rights, that IP plus exclusivities plus restrictions, and rights in versus rights out, leads me to one of the most confusing terms of all, and that is the word license, believe it or not. In the US, we really use the term license with an S, and we use that as both the noun and the verb. So publisher X has licensed with an S rights to publisher Y, and together they sign a license with an S agreement. However, in the rest of the world, particularly in Canada, where I'm from, or in the UK and any other Commonwealth countries like South Africa, something like Australia, something like that, the usage is different. Publisher X has licensed with an S rights to publisher Y, and they sign a license with a C agreement. So why is this important? Really, it's important because all of that is confusion over a core and key term that we use when we're making rights agreements. And, as Chris Kleeman said, it just results in a lot of spell check drama, which none of us want at the contracting stage. And beyond that, it is important to talk about because it reveals one important term that we need to talk about when we talk about rights, which is the difference between licensing and selling. So a sale is made on a physical good. When we're talking about rights, remember that I said the IP is an intangible, right? So when we're talking about rights and we're talking about licensing, really what we're talking about is rights being granted. A sale, when we're talking about selling, is, like I said, something that happens on a physical good, so that there is the transfer of ownership of an item that is usually, tangible, right? So say, when you're buying a print book, it goes from the publisher or bookseller to the reader. And then as a reader, we own that physical book. But a rights license is more like an ebook. So when we are enjoying an ebook, what we're actually doing is we're not owning a physical thing. We have a license to be able to access that ebook, that digital file. And, there's no physical product being exchanged or transferred. So we're talking about a specific right or access being given. It's important when we talk about rights to think about licensing and to not think about selling. Although, in the vernacular, we kind of talk about rights sales. We are actually talking about rights licensing. Of course, sales and marketing techniques can be used to actually gain interest from potential licensees and to, kind of get something out the door, but there is no actual sale happening. So cannot stress that enough. That's a huge one. Oh, another one that I wanted to mention, sorry, I'm not sure where my slide went, but is the difference between the word advance and advance in two different contexts, either an advance on an author's royalties, or an advance in terms of how we talk about an advance or draft contract. So always important to think about the term advance. But other than that, we can think about some common rights terms. And this is really where the work that BISG is doing comes into play with the rights taxonomy that's being developed. When we talk about rights terms and we want to clarify things like the difference between license with an S and license with a C, and what we mean when we talk about advances, and what we talk about when we think about a license versus a sale, really the end goal in having common rights terms is that we want to be able to have accurate information, and we want it to be easily understood, and we want all of that information to be easy to find. And that means that in rights, we want consistent and authoritative data. And I think, you know, having worked with bibliographic metadata for a really long time, I think that it's high time that this kind of standardization, the kind of easily accessible and understood data that we now have with our book data, it's time that we brought it to rights data. You know, you can probably remember when online booksellers, you know, first came on the scene, and all of a sudden publishers had to scramble to send them digital information and to describe their books. And you know, it was not described in a standard or common way, either across the pond, internationally, or even domestically. We would call, you know, a hardback or a hardcover. We know what it is, but the term was actually divergent in different markets. Something as simple as that. We would talk about different contributors being, you know, authors or contributors or editors or series editors. And we had to develop a whole standard with, I don't know how many code lists there are in Onyx now, 15,000, no, I don't know. But we're now on, you know, version, I don't know, 53 of the code lists, something like that. So they are revised, they are added to, they're built on, and we all now have a common language that we use to describe our books and anyone who is associated with them, you know, any contributors, any illustrators, anything like that, any co-publishers. And it's made life a lot easier. And it has allowed us to, you know, streamline the way that we communicate. So we need to come to this kind of an approach with rights data so that it can be consistent and authoritative. And I liked having that little formula for what is rights. So I thought about it in terms of rights data. When I think about it for Onyx, I think that Onyx is made up of tags, so those data elements, plus code lists, so those code lists that are governed by editor, which we can all contribute to, and then the data that we put in as publishers when we describe our own books. And that results in a marketing message. When we think about rights, what I came up with is we're thinking about the rights. We want to know who a rights holder is. We want to know what rights are available, and we want to know what restrictions exist. And we can kind of boil that down and say, right, we want to know who the rights holder is, but also we want to know how to contact them. You know, what's their phone number? What's their email? Who do we go to? We want to know what rights are available, maybe in specific languages or markets. And we want to know what restrictions exist. And of course, there's always a commercial side to all of that, to that equation as well. But all of that has been really focused on by BISG in the work that we've done on the rights taxonomy. So BISG has defined a rights taxonomy, which gives you essentially all of the information that you would need when you are thinking about sending an automated request or an automated message that communicates common rights data. And we broke it down into a few different buckets. The first one is rights data. So that is, you know, any of that core information about who holds it, right? The next one is a request. So are certain rights available or not in certain languages and certain territories? The next one is a license. So any of the information that is actually held in the license itself can be transacted. And then finally, royalty data. And that's always the endpoint to any of these discussions or thoughts that we have about rights is, you know, what happens? How do we get paid, and where does the money go at the end? These are the categories that we really focused on when we looked at a rights taxonomy. And I'm sure Brian and Jonathan will share the work that we've done so far with any of you if you haven't seen it already. But all of that leads me to another kind of foundational question, which is, what is rights about? So this is, really the end point to what do we talk about when we talk about rights? We talk about rights in versus rights out. We talk about licensing versus sales with a focus on licensing. We talk about intangible versus tangible. And of course, we talk about money. But when you think about it, finally, rights is really about relationships. It's about, this might be an obvious thing, but I thought it was worth highlighting, because as much as we would like to automate and streamline and standardize rights, we're never going to take rights professionals out of the equation, right? We're not going to replace anyone working in a rights department, but we are going to be giving you tools through this rights taxonomy and through a potential pilot that BISG would like to run to improve your work, to scale your rights business, and really to make everything easier. So in the same way that we brought Onyx standards to title metadata, and I can tell you every publishing house now has a metadata person or a metadata team, and that was not previously the case. It used to be just the sales guys handling all of that data, poorly sometimes. This is not going to replace rights data, rights professionals, because it's really about relationships. It's about relationships between creators and publishers, between licensors and licensees, between rights holders and agents, between content and readers, and between the intangible IP and the tangible products that are created. And of course, it's about, domestic and international relationships or global licensing. With that, of course, I'll leave some time at the end for questions, but I would encourage everyone on the call to please, please, please get involved with the rights taxonomy. It's really about developing a common language that we can all use and understand, so that when we're talking about permissions, we all know that that's either rights in or it's rights out, or, are we talking about permissions that we're giving or permissions that we're granting? That's why we need the common languages, so that we all understand what it is that we're talking about. This book, I do like to use book covers when I give talks, and the best kind of people. This is a Canadian author, Zoe Whittall, if you haven't read it, excellent book. But the rights community, and particularly within BISG, really is, what I would call the best kind of people. And we're all working hard to try and, get to this point of having a shared taxonomy and shared language that we can lean on and leverage. I will say it can be daunting. It's not easy. That's why it would be nice to have everyone, as many of you involved as possible. And I'll steal from The Handmaid's Tale. This is the Latin, and I've sort of replaced the word bastarde or bastards with sina, which means, loosely translates here to don't let the standards get you down. It really is rewarding to get involved with the standards community, whether it be for metadata or for rights, because it gives us the opportunity to shape the conversation and to help understand the work that we're doing. That's it. I sort of sped through that. I didn't think I would go that quickly, but as Brian said, I'm Tricia McCraney. I'm a projects consultant at Virtusales, and we are the creators of the Biblio suite. I guess we'll open it up for questions, and happy to have a debate about other confusing terms in the rights vocabulary.
Thank you, Tricia. And we have a time for several questions. So if you have anything that you haven't written down just yet, please feel free to add it. The best place is the Q&A box. The alternate is the chat, and I'll keep an eye on both for Tricia. The question I wanted to start with, because you are working currently for Virtusales, what's the role of vendors in managing the taxonomy? How are we engaged with vendors, and what important role do they have in kind of bringing the taxonomy to the people who would use their systems?
Yeah, it's a good question. So many of the vendors who are on the BISG Rights Committee have already mapped the taxonomy that we created to our own databases, including Virtusales. And the role of vendors really is, I guess maybe it's kind of similar to the role of trading partners if we think about Onyx, and it is to support the taxonomy to ensure that we can use it, we can transact it, and that we are keeping up to date with any of the changing standards. So in the same way that, you know, you send an Onyx file to Amazon and you send an Onyx file to Barnes and Noble and maybe to your own website, it's important for vendors to support any taxonomy that's created and to be able to process and ingest data that's received through an electronic message, such as we're proposing for the rights taxonomy. And just to clarify that, really what we're looking for is a standard, you know, set of terms that we can agree on that we would use in a rights grant, for example, or a standard set of terms that we would use when we have a royalty statement. Doesn't mean that everybody has to have the same royalty statement or has to use the same format. It just means that we all use the same terms or data elements when we're sending and sharing data, right? So right now, you know, we get Onyx in 2.1 format and Onyx in 3.0 format, sometimes from different publishers, and different publishers send different versions, and vendors have different capabilities in terms of what they can actually manage or ingest, but we're all working with the same set of terms. And really, I think the commitment from vendors is to support that, and maybe also to facilitate any pilot projects, because these things don't move forward without vendor involvement. You know, if Amazon hadn't insisted on, well, I don't know that they insisted, but they decided to cease support for Onyx 2.1, you know, you could argue that Onyx 3.0 wouldn't be as well supported by publishers as it is today, or it's certainly better supported now than it was before that decision came through.
Yeah, we were early on it, but maybe that was the problem.
That's right.
It's a question from Francine, and the question is, where can one find information to investigate how their licensing pricing lines up with others in their field? And I can say unequivocally, not BISG, because we're not allowed to talk about pricing or competitive information in that sense. We're really working to build the industry. But I think it's fair to say that, you know, discussions with agents, with authors, would probably yield a reasonable sense. And on occasion, you might hire somebody from another publisher or another house, and they might be able to give you a perspective. Tricia, do you have a point of view on that at any point?
No, I would agree with that, Brian. I think right now, there isn't any aggregate rights information in any database anywhere. So it's hard to say. I would tend to think that agents would be the best source for that kind of intel.
Sure. And Chris Kleeman, who you mentioned in your remarks, is the current chair of the Rights Committee, adds that, you know, from her, she serves as a consultant for the industry. But she says we don't talk about pricing, but there is reporting in the industry about rights deals. And she identifies Publishers Marketplace, which has both a daily newsletter as well as a database that you can access for a fee, as well as Publishers Weekly and Publishing Perspectives that have some anecdotal data that might be useful as well.
Thank you, Chris.
You actually, one other question I wanted to touch base with you on, Tricia, is just simply, not everybody has a rights management system of the sort that you work pretty diligently to set up. It's not purely a case that only large publishers have it, but how should and I think this is probably one of the real advantages of the taxonomy, how should medium and smaller sized publishers be thinking about the value and the purpose of a taxonomy?
Oh, that's a good question. I think so. implementing Biblio, we do work with small publishers and large publishers. We do have some major multinationals, but we also have, some customers who are startups. And I think, the important thing in terms of the taxonomy is really to think about how you can standardize your own data, first of all. So think about, all of those important things when you're thinking about a contract. Think about how you cannot have many crazy different iterations of contracts. So have standard contract templates and grants and terms, and try to stick to them as much as possible. Obviously, you will have variations and you will have instances where you'll go kind of off that script, but getting to understanding what it is that you are doing when you're licensing or acquiring rights and keeping that as standard as possible is important. But of course, it's also important to be flexible and keep as much available to you as you can. But I think that idea that I raised about the difference between rights in and rights out is really important, and making sure that you're managing that within your own publishing house in a meaningful way and you're not confusing terms. It makes it easier to manage your own data. But I think what it comes down to is really in every conversation that you have about rights with another publisher. So if you have a potential licensee, clarify what you're talking about, so there's no drama either in the conversation or in a potential contract as well.
And do you think that advice applies as well to agents working in the space, that trying to come up with a more consistent approach, that things like royalty rates and the like may vary, but that the structures of the deal are understood and kind of work within a known framework? Is that a good approach?
I think so. I think it's crucial.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question. Let me take a quick look. This is an observation from Chris. She indicates she's a big fan of the request piece of the taxonomy, specifically saying that most requesters include all of the data. If most requesters included all of the data that's in the request piece, the rights and permissions professionals would be able to answer that more quickly. Is that something that you've experienced as well, that the more structured you are, the faster the responses, the more likely it is you're able to close a deal?
Absolutely. I think one of the main benefits of having a rights management system is that you have access to the information, quickly. So I have seen, and not that long ago, publishers who still have their rights information on index cards. So when a query is made, somebody has to go to the filing cabinet or to the physical cards on their desk and look through it and see what rights are available. Having it in a rights management system that's digital definitely speeds it up, and making sure that everything is standardized as opposed to just in notes fields everywhere all over the place speeds it up 100%.
Yeah, Chris notes that there are some publishers who kind of create that wish list of information that we'd love you to give us when requesting rights or permissions on their websites to kind of shortcut it. So, but we feel the taxonomy plays that role as well. What we'll do, Tricia, as you suggested, is give people a link to the taxonomy when we send out the reminder email, and the link to the recording. I want to thank you today for making the time and also putting together the presentation for this coffee break webinar. Really appreciate it. You don't have a Thanksgiving next week that's quite the same as ours, but I hope you have a good quiet week at the end of the week when all the folks in America are snoozing from tryptophan.
Thank you. Yeah, we already celebrated Canadian Thanksgiving in October.
Right. So you beat us by a month. All right. Take care and thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.